And good morning, Boquete. Good morning, David. Good morning, Bolivar, a fantastic engineer here at the studio in Boquete, and Veronica. I'm sure I got that name right. I don't know why I have so much trouble with that, because I know Veronica, Valerie, and Victoria, and I get them all messed up. You're listening to Boquete Now, talk radio on Radio Cherokee 103.3 FM, sponsored by Big Daddy's Grill and the ACCB. Who has a show every last Friday of the month, by the way, is ACCB month. We always have someone on from them, and it's always a great show. Today, we have a very special guest in the studio, Celeste Mendelson, and if you don't know who she is, you're about to. And rather than sit here and try to explain to what she does, we're just going to say hello, Celeste. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, Al. I'm grateful to be here.
And I know we had some scheduling problems. You were supposed to be on 2 weeks ago, then last week, but we finally got our act together here, and I'm really looking forward to today's show. You are a yoga instructor.
I'm a yoga therapist.
Yoga therapist. See, this is why I need to let you do this. So
Okay.
Tell us a little about what you do.
Okay, thanks, I will. All right, so yoga therapy is a little different. It requires a little bit more education. Mm-hmm. And I specialize. I am not working so much, although I do work with people physically. My focus is on CPTSD, which is complex PTSD, which typically originates in childhood, but doesn't have to. It's repetitive trauma. And you may be wondering what a class of 30 people with one instructor doing all these complicated poses and back bends and handstands and all of that has to do with trauma, of all things. And I'll tell you probably very little, because I don't use yoga in that way.
Right. Okay.
What I do does involve movement, but the purpose isn't you got to look like this and you got to do it like that. It's really about becoming more in touch with your physical self, because one of the things that happens in trauma is that people detach from their physical bodies. They're not present here anymore, so they really don't know how they feel physically. And that's a big part of it, because sometimes there's violence involved in complex trauma. Frequently, that's true.
Wow.
With children or with adults.
Sure.
And it's not safe to physically be present, so they're not. You wouldn't necessarily think, oh, well, I cannot be present, but it's actually quite possible. And when that happens, and it happens consistently, people become completely detached from their physical selves, and they don't really understand where their body is in space. They may not be able to translate physical feelings effectively and accurately. And so that's a part of what I do. And the other part of it is, of course, breath, which is huge. Trauma survivors tend not to breathe. And it doesn't matter whether that's somebody who was in the war in Afghanistan or whether it was somebody who lived with alcoholism as a child. The tendency is that we hold our breath or we breathe very shallowly. And it's a fear response. It comes from the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's that I'm holding my breath because I'm afraid if I breathe, you'll hear me, or you'll know that I'm here.
That's pretty deep right there. Yeah. I wonder if that has any connection to sleep apnea.
It totally does. As a matter of fact,
see, yes. I'm glad I brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It can. Sleep issues are a big thing for trauma survivors. Insomnia is a pretty standard complaint for people who have CPTSD, and there are a lot of pieces to that puzzle. It's not like you can say, well, okay, this is the thing.
Sure. Yeah.
But breath is a big part of it, and people who can't take a full deep breath because they've compressed their belly so tight against their sternum that or their rib cage, it's like right, because your diaphragm has to move in order to breathe. Well, yeah. And if you're holding your belly in, if you're sucking in your gut, soldier, okay, so that's true. Like again, PTSD from the military, that's a thing. Or you're a woman walking around going, I want to look skinny, or you're a trauma survivor, or all of the above. you're not getting a full breath because your diaphragm can't move.
Yeah.
And if your diaphragm can't move, you're not getting a good inhale or exhale. And so
Yeah.
you're breathing about 1/3 of your lungs as opposed to
Wow.
the whole thing.
And that's fascinating because I think a lot of people don't really understand the importance of just the simple act of taking a deep breath. And I've had a lot of guests on this show that deal with either trauma. I've had yoga instructors. I've had all kinds of people on this show over the last couple of years that deal with your body, the body. And the one common thing that goes through all of this is breath, is breathing. Take a deep breath, ground yourself, center yourself, however it's presented. That seems to be something that is paramount to everything.
It totally is. It totally is. People who can't breathe well can't think well. I mean, your brain requires oxygen.
Sure.
And if you're not getting it, is it surprising that you're anxious? Well, you may have anxiety from events and PTSD and whatever, but the bottom line is, if you're not breathing, that anxiety gets worse. Because your brain is going, hello, I need oxygen. Hello, I need oxygen. It's trying to tell you something. And you're not listening because you don't know how. You're disconnected.
And the shallow breathing, that's I hadn't ever put that together because obviously, I haven't had anyone like you on the show yet who has put that together. But about 10, 15 years ago, I'd gone in, I have Parkinson's disease. So I'd gone in to have some tests done. Mm-hmm. And the doctor says to me, you need to go to have the sleep test. I said, okay, I'll go have a sleep test. He said, how have you been sleeping? I said, well, I really haven't been because between all that symptoms and everything. So I went over and they hooked me up with, how the test goes. You got wires everywhere. And the first thought was, how in the world am I going to be able to sleep with all like this? Anyway, eventually I did fall asleep. And what they told me was surprising. They said in an hour, I had anywhere between 180 and 200 incidences of my breath being abnormal and that I breathe extremely shallow.
Yeah.
And they gave me the machine to take home, which I can't use. I'm one of the 20% of people. I can't use it. No, I can't sleep with it.
Oh, no.
It just, I think Alien, right? The thing on your head.
Yeah.
And I've tried all the different things, but that's a whole other show. But I never thought, and we talked earlier, before the show, and I want to get to some of that because it's absolutely fascinating. But I am personally not aware of any trauma that I had when I was a child. But yet, I do have breathing issues.
It doesn't mean that you had trauma. It doesn't necessarily.
Because there are people out there, they're going to think,
No. People can have sleep apnea problems and not have a trauma history.
So it'd just be a physiological thing.
Right. Yeah. But is it something that comes along with trauma frequently? Yes, because of that thing that we were talking about. It's like they don't breathe well. And even when they are asleep, they may still have that tension in their gut, right? That keeps them in that red alert place of, things can happen. Even if I'm sleeping.
It's like a constant state of alert.
It is a constant state of red alert.
Even when you're sleeping.
It is a constant state of red alert. Sometimes it's even when you're sleeping. Frequently, I think. And it's part of the sleep problems, right? How can you sleep when you're on red alert?
Sure, yeah.
When you're waiting for, somebody to come home drunk and start yelling or,
the anticipation.
If that was your history as a child, sleep is hard.
Wow.
Sleep is hard.
And you had mentioned just right before the show started about these things being passed on. And you told a fascinating story about rats.
You want me to tell you that story
I would
again?
love for you to tell everyone listening because I sat here when you told me that and that actually kind of blew my mind. So yes, please tell the rat story.
Tell the rat story. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you about the rat story is I cannot remember the name of the study, which is a bummer because that would be really helpful. You could look it up and go, that's what she was talking about. But the story of the study goes like this. The scientists took a group of rats and they put them in a cage with a metal bottom that had electrodes attached to it. So they had the ability to electrify the bottom of the cage. They would ring a bell and then they would send the electricity through the bottom of the cage and shock the rats. over time, what happened is the rats are not stupid, right? They learned if that bell rings, we're going to get a shock.
Yep.
And they knew that. And because they knew that, even before they ever got shocked, even when they stopped shocking them, if the bell rang, they went into, they had the electrodes attached and whatever. They were monitoring their heart rates and their blood pressure and all the rest of it. They would become dysregulated because they knew it was coming because they heard the bell. Then they took those rats, they had babies, they bred them, and they took the babies and they put them in the cage. And they rang the bell. They didn't shock the babies. But here's the weird part of the story. The babies were dysregulated just like their parents were, even though they had never experienced the shock. The ringing of that bell was the signal that there was something bad going to happen, and they knew it. And they bred them for 7 generations. And through those 7 generations, that held true. At the 8th, the cycle broke. What that tells us is that generational trauma, which is something you may or may not have heard before, you may think is, oh, that's woo-woo, that's like, no, that can't happen. It's real, and they proved it.
Yeah, and I would imagine that, if you're dealing with someone who is a victim of that, that's got to be a very, very difficult wall to break through, a very difficult barrier to break through, dealing with someone who's dealing with trauma they don't even know they have. Exactly.
So, not to harsh your buzz here, but you had parents that grew up in the Depression.
Yeah.
Is it possible that there's generational trauma in your background? Yeah, it's possible.
I would, because I don't know what happened 5, 6, 7, on my dad's side of the family.
Right, exactly.
So yeah.
So we don't know necessarily what happened, but we do know what we can do today. And the first thing I'm going to tell everybody here is please take a deep breath. You can test for yourself. Take your hands and put one on your chest and one on your belly.
I'm going to do this. Okay, right?
You're going to do this with me?
I'll be your guinea pig.
Okay, be my guinea pig.
Okay.
One on your chest and one on your belly.
Got it.
Okay, and then just take a couple of breaths in and out. And feel yourself breathing in and feel yourself breathing out. Notice the sensation of breath. What you feel in your hands, what you feel in your chest and your belly.
All right.
And then answer a question, just right off the top of your head. Where do you feel the most movement in your hands? In your belly or your chest?
Definitely in my belly.
Okay, well, good for you. Maybe you didn't have too much trauma when you were a kid. Frequently, trauma survivors will breathe only in their chest, or very little at least.
And why is that?
Belly.
Why is that?
Because they're contracting their stomach, because it's that fear response,
Right.
that, and they're like fight or flight freeze motion.
Like
They're
bracing
freeze.
for something. I
They're
know when I'm
bracing.
bracing for, like, when I walk in the house and my dogs are running right towards me. I'm like, oh,
yeah,
okay.
exactly. Like that. So
Or
you're
my
bracing.
wife when I come home,
You're in trouble. Maybe there could be trauma there. I'm kidding. So the thing is that trauma survivors frequently, you will hear them say, if they do this test, if you guys out there do this test and you find that you're breathing more into your chest than you are into your belly, you'll know something, right? Because we tend to, and I'll say we because, I came to this work honestly. I am a trauma survivor. So that being the case, I was a chest breather. Oh. And I found that out, big surprise, in a yoga class, because I had an instructor that was going to do a breath practice.
Sure, yeah.
And said, I want you to do this thing.
Yeah.
And just notice where your breath is mostly. And I was mostly a chest breather. And she said, you're a reverse breather. And I went, huh?
What?
And I was like, what? And so I learned firsthand. Is it fixable? Absolutely. But it requires you to let the muscles of your belly go. And in our society, that the other thing is societal. If you're going to relax your belly, you're not going to be really comfortable in the world right now, because if you're a woman, you want to hold that belly in so you look nice and thin, and if you're a guy, and you were in the army, it's like suck that gut in, soldier, right?
Yeah.
So the reality is you have to kind of go against conditioning, societal conditioning, but also more important than societal conditioning is you have to go against your natural instinct at this point to say, I need to breathe fully. And because your diaphragm can't move if your stomach is flat against your rib cage, you can't take in a full breath. So you're really only getting about a third of the oxygen and breath that you should be getting. Okay, the capacity that you should have, which will tell you if you're feeling anxious a lot, and anxiety is a big symptom of trauma. And if you're feeling anxious a lot, try taking a full deep breath with your belly relaxed. If you do that a couple of times, you might even find yourself yawning because your body is going, oh, finally, I'm getting some oxygen, yay, and it wants more.
Yeah, well, you know, it's fascinating to me, and I've had a couple of people on the show when I had first gotten started that specialized in how societal norms, what's expected of people, and one of the most common issues, I guess, for lack of a better word, was what people feel that society expects them to look like.
Right.
And we had a whole show on body shaming and all of that. And one of the main issues was, and it wasn't, you know, it was a majority of the test subjects, I guess you'd call them, were women, but it does apply to men too. About when you say suck the gut in. Right?
Sure.
You know, you're a size 12 trying to fit into a size 10. You know, if you're a guy, you're a 38 trying to squeeze into a 36, and then no one likes that little mushroom, you know, muffin top. And you walk around all day with all sucked in and everything. And then, you know, the joke is when you get home, everything comes off and, you know, you're like twice the size. But part of that, if you're dealing with trauma already, is it even more difficult when that is compounded with trying to, you know, look your best or trying to fit this image that society puts on you, especially,
totally.
I would imagine for women. You all got way more to deal with than we do.
I won't argue with you there. I think women do have that perception of what's appropriate for us to look like going on a lot. But the other piece of it, I think, too, is that we become conditioned to that. And it's not just societal, but there's body shaming that happens at home.
Oh, yeah.
You know, kids get that. You know, they're going through those awkward stages of growth, and they're starting to, they get a little heavier before they get a little taller. And that's just what happens.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you're putting on some weight there. You know, we better cut you. Well, you need to go on a diet, right? It's like, you're 12.
Really? You know, enjoy those Twinkies, man. Come on.
Well, I don't know about Twinkies, but the sugar is not good for you. But aside from that, the bottom line is that we shame our children in that way too. And they watch it in us and they emulate what we do. So that becomes part of that picture too.
Sure, yeah.
Right? It's like, oh no, I can't eat that because I'm on a diet.
Yeah.
You know. Gosh, you got big quickly. You know, look at that belly you got on you, girl.
And that's trauma too. I guess if you're young and then those awkward years aren't just awkward at home. You know, they're awkward at school and everywhere. And I could definitely see how that would affect as you get older.
As you know, the thing is yes, that's totally true, and that would be true for anybody. But if you are a complex trauma survivor, meaning you have a home that has that is not functional or not well functional, maybe you have a parent that has a problem with alcohol or drugs. Maybe somebody in your family is violent. Maybe your parents divorced. Maybe one of your relatives, close relatives, mother, father, brother, sister died when you were young. Maybe there's verbal abuse in your home. I mean, I'm giving a partial list here, and I want to talk about something that has been around actually for a very long time. It's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It was done in 1988 and published in 1989 by Kaiser Permanente and the CDC.
Okay.
And it is a list of 10 questions. And what they called it then is adverse childhood experiences.
Okay.
And how that relates is these adverse experiences are also harbingers of trauma, of complex
right.
trauma. But what they related them to at the time was not that complex trauma issue, because that wasn't even
A thing yet.
a thing
right?
yet.
Yes.
There wasn't even thought about, even in psychological circles. What they were relating it to was physical health, which is fascinating.
Oh.
So what they found is that if you answer those 10 questions and you have one adverse experience, I'm trying to remember the numbers. And if you go to the ACEs study online, and you can find it, you can look under either ACEs or ACEs Too High, and there's a couple of other ones that are with that same nomenclature. They have actually expanded it over the years, and I'm grateful for that, because initially it was very limited. But what they found, I want to say a 25% increase if you have one ACE, one adverse experience, in diabetes, cancer, heart disease, insomnia, drug addiction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Physical issues as well as emotional issues. And they were focusing on the physical at that point in time. Wow. So, and what they said at the end of that study was that if you took a room full of 10 people, probably about 4 in 10 would have at least one ACE, one adverse experience in their history. That's been revised.
Okay.
Now it's like 7 in 10.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
where this came into reality for me initially was because I was a yoga teacher when I read the ACEs study. I went, well, darn it. That means that if I have 10 students in my class, 4 of them are trauma survivors, that's not cool. We've got to figure out how to deal with that,
Sure.
because the truth is people who have trauma history don't react the same as people who grow up in a healthy environment. And they don't react the same to suggestion. They don't react the same to touch. They don't react the same to languaging. Wow. And I'll give you a personal example.
Sure,
I think I said I am also a trauma survivor.
Yes, you did.
So in my first yoga class, the thing that just really kept me coming back was the reality that when a teacher would give me an instruction to do something, I frequently couldn't figure out what the heck to do. My body, and I thought I was, I'm flexible, I'm cool, I'm,
I got this.
I got
No,
this.
you
I can
don't.
do yoga. I can do this. I couldn't figure out where to put my feet. I couldn't figure out how to turn my body. She would say, and I'd be like, do what? And when that happened, of course, I'd be looking around the room trying to figure out what's everybody else doing, right? Because I couldn't make it make sense. And I recognized that I couldn't take her instruction and follow it, and I couldn't figure out why.
Wow.
And it wasn't until years later I read a book. It's called The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And I found myself highlighting and underlining and going, oh my God, this is my life. And I went, and he talked about not that body dysmorphia, not being able to be present in your body, not being able to make things make sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And I went, that's me. That was me. Okay. I got it. What also happened in that yoga class is my instructor would walk around the room, and if some of you have been in yoga classes and you know what I'm talking about, she would do something called Ujjayi breath, which sounds like this. It's that very deep breathing. It kind of sounds like Darth Vader.
I was just thinking
it kind of
that,
sounds like Darth Vader. So we have a negative input with that already, right? It kind of sounds like Darth Vader. Now that breath is supposed to be good for focus and energy when you're doing, strong yoga poses. But she would walk around the room like that with her arms crossed, which you guys can't see, of course, but my arms are crossed.
It's on video.
This is on video too?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, hi guys. With their arms crossed. And walk up behind you and check out your posture. And make adjustments if there was something, if there was, you'd move your shoulders or, she would touch your shoulders or do whatever. And this woman would walk up behind me with that breath. And so I knew she was there. And then I would see her out of the corner of my eye, and her arms would be crossed. And she'd stand there for a minute, and then she'd walk away. She never adjusted me.
Huh.
And I want to tell you what I know today is very different from what I understood then. What I understood then from that was, well, that she's doing that breath, and I knew what Ujjayi breath was, but that didn't connect.
Didn't connect with you.
I didn't hear it that way.
Hold on. It's the joys of having a semi-outdoor studio.
Yes, I got it.
All right. Continue.
Okay, so she did that breath, and my thought was, she is disapproving of me. I am not in the right position. I'm doing something wrong. So I'm trying to straighten up and I'm trying to do it the best I think I know how. And of course she's got her arms crossed, and I'm like, okay, that's a sign of disapproval.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah.
And then she would walk away, which said to me at the time, I'm not even worth adjusting.
Oh, man.
I'm hopeless.
Wow.
That's what my brain said. Now here's the weirdness of this. I kept going back to that class.
Uh-huh.
She was still my teacher.
Sure.
She offered a 200-hour teacher training. I took it. Mm-hmm. She offered a 300-hour teacher training afterwards. I took it. This was a woman who I thought didn't like me, and I am taking her training classes. Wow. That's kind of insane, guys. If you don't understand that, it really is. That's trauma. So putting myself in dangerous situations. I mean, it wasn't really a dangerous situation, but my perception was that it was a dangerous situation, and I was there anyway. That's what happens to trauma survivors. We think that's what we deserve. We think that's what we get. We don't like it, but we accept it. Wow. Accepting unacceptable behavior is an absolute reality with people who live through childhood trauma. Man. So I'm in her 300-hour training, and we're having a group discussion. And as we're having this group discussion, she's talking about how do you walk up behind, how do you work with people in a class, how do you adjust, how do you do things like that. And she says, well, you guys all know, you've been in my classes, so when I walk up behind somebody, I always use Ujjayi breath so they know that I'm there, so that I don't surprise them.
So that was not what you had.
That is not what I thought was going on at all.
Yeah.
And it actually, and I didn't initially, do you know what? I didn't actually initially process that. I didn't process it as she said it. I discounted it. It wasn't until like a couple years later when I read Dr. Van der Kolk's book and understood some of the things about trauma, and I was like just working on me, trying to figure out how to shift my own trauma issues. And I went, damn, she wasn't actually being negative about me at all. She was just trying to let me know that she was present, and that's not the same thing. And I had this negative perception of this woman who was my teacher for years.
So you thought that she was just being disapproving of you.
Yes. I thought there was something wrong with me.
And that you
which
deserve
is what
that.
Pretty much every trauma survivor thinks, is that there's something wrong with them, because that's what it feels like.
Sure.
So I guess what I want to say is that our perceptions, those of us with trauma history, that especially if it's unaddressed, our perceptions are not always accurate.
Yeah.
We frequently have a disproportional picture of what is true in the world. And what it is that we react to. Yeah. So I want to say about that ACEs study one more time. If you're interested, find it. ACES, Adverse Childhood Experiences Study.
I'm going to put
fascinating.
When the show is over usually over the weekend, what I do is I do a promo. A post-production promo where I have the video and I put that, and I also put links and information in there. So at some point, if you would remind me, because my brain doesn't work the way it should anymore. Yeah, the name of that book, right? Yeah. And whatever information that you think that the listeners should know, and I will definitely include that. And you know what I do a lot when I have extremely interesting guests on? is I use my family as, I bounce ideas off of. Hey, I learned this because I'm learning stuff. I've learned so much in the last 2 years from people in this community.
For sure.
My daughter is in her third year of her doctoral program for being a chiropractor. She's also a licensed yoga instructor and a life coach. So my next phone call with her is going to be very, very interesting.
Did you know?
I'm sure she does.
I'm sure she
I'm
does
sure she
too.
already knew
I'm
this,
sure she does
but
too. And you're going to be going, yeah, okay.
yeah. And she's, I need to know this person. So
I would love to meet her. That would be great.
She's our little ninja warrior princess. That's
Woo.
what we call her. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, it's interesting that all this is connected. You wouldn't think that, obviously, going through through trauma and through things in your life that are they adversely affect your physical body, that those two things or three things or four things, even from what you said, are it's so interconnected.
Totally interconnected. Totally interconnected.
The ACE, is it ACE?
ACES.
ACE.
ACEs. It's the ACE study. Adverse Childhood Experiences Study.
Now, how does this tie? And I'm just off the top of my head. You earlier the story, the rat story.
Yeah.
Right. So, is it possible that some of the physical ailments and diseases and whatnot that you have, that a person has, can be a result of that generational trauma?
It can be a direct result. Yes, a direct result. And right, that heart disease and cancer and diabetes, they consider that there is a genetic link.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I do know that. 'Cause
Okay,
I'm diabetic, and they have told me, you didn't give yourself diabetes, which I had a hard time dealing with because if you saw the way I used to eat. But yeah, they told me that is definitely a matter of genetics.
Yes, and so obviously it is trauma.
Yeah.
So is there a connection?
I don't
Obviously
know,
so according to ACEs, there's a connection.
But people who and this puts me in a position because people have been listening to the show for years know I have Parkinson's, I have diabetes, I have cancer, I have neuropathy. And 3 of those things are hereditary.
Okay.
And as we talked earlier, I have no recollection of any trauma. I had a charmed childhood growing up. Everything was just puppies and kittens that I could remember.
Right.
But maybe there's something I don't remember, which would translate to a lot of people who may be feeling the same thing. Well, I've got all these physical ailments. I don't remember having, anything in my life that was traumatic. Now you brought this whole other dimension into this.
I opened the can of worms. I did, yes. So I want to say about that, if you don't remember periods of your childhood, and I know people they say, well, I don't remember until I was 7. I don't remember any of my childhood until I was 7.
I go back to 3. I remember my 3rd birthday.
Okay, I remember back to being an infant being carried by my father.
Oh, wow.
But that being the case, my father was also an unrecovered alcoholic.
Yeah.
Who committed suicide when I was 10.
Yeah.
So what I'll
There's
say
trauma,
is, does it always correlate that, you don't remember? No, that's not true. But sometimes people block that stuff off so that they don't remember it anymore because it's too painful to remember.
So that's a defense mechanism.
It's a defense mechanism. So you may or may not know. And I guess the question is if you have great big blank spaces in your remembrance of your childhood, that could be an indication. That's a possibility.
That's very interesting.
The other thing that I wanted to say about, so why yoga as a method for working with trauma, as I said, physically, because we lose our ability to be present in our bodies,
Sure.
and that's important. Breath is huge. Meditation is a part of that as well because it helps us to focus, and people who are anxious typically don't focus well.
Right.
The other thing is science has found some interesting things. So there's something called the vagus nerve that lives in our body. It is the longest nerve in the human body. It runs from our gut to our brain. And I say it that way rather than our brain to our gut because for a long time scientists believed that the impulses started in the brain and moved down to the belly. The truth is the impulses start in your belly and move up to your brain. So the feelings that you get here are from the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which I know I mentioned a little bit ago.
Yes, you did.
Okay, so the sympathetic nervous system is responsible in trauma for fight or flight. This parasympathetic is the relax. So that's also free. It's the combination of the two. It's a freeze response. It's like, I can't move, but I'm scared to death, right? So it's like that. But it's not relaxed. Relaxed is parasympathetic. If you want to go to sleep, you want your parasympathetic online. You cannot have your parasympathetic online if your brain is racing with thoughts of, oh my God, what's going to happen now? And I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And I may lose my job today. And da-da-da-da-da. You know, when our brain is running,
wow.
right? Or what's he going to do? And is he going to come home drunk? And what's going to happen to the kids?
Yeah.
You
Just
can't go to sleep like that.
a constant state of angst.
It is. Yeah. You can't go to sleep like that. So the relationship between insomnia and trauma are very close. All of that, how does that relate to yoga? This is all stuff that I learned how to deal with and overcome with yoga. This was my own journey. When I read that, I mean, I was a yoga teacher. When I read that book, I was not yet a yoga therapist, but that was soon to come. That's another 1,500 hours of coursework. But when I read that book and I recognized, and he also talks about, Dr. van der Kolk talks about yoga as a way in. And I thought, well, it's been my way in.
Yeah.
I get that.
Sure.
What I didn't understand was, okay, so how do I work with these 4 to 7 out of 10 people in my class that have trauma history? And there is training for that. It's trauma-aware yoga. You know, there are several iterations of that, different people that teach it. I teach it too, and I teach teachers how to work with that as well. One of the things, so this is an interest, that teacher that I was telling you about was way back in history before before all these studies came out. Walking behind people. You don't do that.
Yeah.
You don't do that in a class where you know you've got people that have trauma history, because that's scary to know that there could be somebody coming up behind you at any moment.
Yeah.
There are certain poses you don't do with trauma survivors. Downward dog would be one of those for kind of obvious reasons.
Yeah.
You know, cat-cow would be one of those for kind of obvious reasons. There are a few others, but the point is, as a teacher, and many teachers don't have this awareness, we are so capable of triggering our students without even realizing it, just like my teacher did to me.
Yeah.
Completely unintentionally.
Yeah.
I don't adjust people. I don't touch them. I definitely don't touch them without permission. And the only time I will touch at all is if they're doing something that I am concerned will actually hurt them.
Yeah.
And I've tried already to tell them, to demonstrate first what it is that I want them to do instead, to explain it to them. And if that doesn't work, then can I touch you to show you what I mean?
But sometimes, you know, if someone's falling over, I got punched in the face a long time ago by someone who had too much to drink, and they had tripped and were heading into, if they had hit what they were unintentionally aiming for, they would have been hurt bad. So really my reaction, I reached down and I grabbed her in an inappropriate spot unintentionally, and the elbow came back and gave me a black eye, and I was like, well, sorry, but you would have punctured your face on a spiked fence, right? But no, I understand that, you know, and I know what some of those poses are. I've attempted yoga. I wasn't very successful at it, just mainly because my body doesn't have stamina, or I was doing it wrong. More than likely, I was just doing it wrong.
Maybe you were holding your breath.
But probably. But yeah, no, I understand now, you know, by what you just said about you have to get permission to put your hands on somebody.
Yes, you do. And
thankfully, people are becoming more and more aware of that in many situations. But I can understand how if someone has CPTSD or even just anxiety, how that would be an unnerving experience. Just all of a sudden, this arm comes out of nowhere and you're being manipulated. Yeah.
Especially if you're like touching their hips to move their hips in a direction. Right? Or it can be really.
Yeah. Well, no, there's a lot of people that you know they were sexually molested.
Yes.
You know, when they were very young, and that doesn't go away.
Nope.
You know, that sticks with
trauma.
you. I want to ask you real quick.
Yeah.
You said that vagus nerve.
Yes.
I was talking to a friend of mine who's he's a counselor here in town, and he had told me when he works with people, he says, "Okay, your inner critic, right? When you ask your inner critic, I'm really mangling this, so bear with me. Where do you feel the physical?" And most people feel it in their gut. In their gut. And I was like, well, that's fascinating. I thought, like many other people, everything comes from here and, emanates throughout the body, especially emotional things. But no, he said, if you address that inner critic and you ask where you feel it, most people will feel it here, which tells me that's where it starts. And then it comes up. And I never really put that together until you mentioned about how that works. That's fascinating.
So I want to ask you a question. Have you ever heard the phrase, "that makes my skin crawl"?
Oh, yeah.
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 Where does that start?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It isn't starting up here.
No,
okay?
it starts down.
So
yeah,
here's the thing. We say that and we dismiss it. In the same breath that we say it, we dismiss it. It's like, oh, that makes my skin crawl, or he's a pain in the neck, or I've got butterflies in my stomach.
Yeah.
We say these words, these phrases that are in fact based in fact, because that is a physical feeling in the body.
Yeah.
All right.
Sure is.
But we don't think of it as a physical feeling. We think of it as an expression. We don't recognize that it connects to something. That those words actually are describing a physical feeling that we have. And that's an important thing to remember, because the truth is, as trauma survivors, frequently, as I mentioned, going through multiple years of yoga with a teacher that I thought didn't like me, and paying for the privilege, right?
No good deed.
Right, exactly. So, and today I can forgive that. Thank you. I can look at it and go, she didn't mean it. Yeah. But the thing is that, and I had a resentment against her because she'd done that, but yet I was still in the class.
Yeah.
Who is responsible for that, right?
Yeah.
But there I was. So the thing is that when we aren't present with where these feelings are in our bodies, we don't listen to them. And when we don't listen to them, we frequently put ourselves back into situations which, if we'd paid attention, we would know we're not healthy.
Yeah.
That includes,
This is not good for me.
Yeah, this is not good for me. That includes relationships with people who we shouldn't be involved with.
Toxic
relationships.
relationships.
Have you ever had the, I'm not asking you necessarily, but to the audience, have you ever had the experience of having a relationship with someone that was terrible, and then having another relationship with somebody else that was terrible the same way, and another one, and another one, and another one? That is what we do. We tend to recreate the trauma of our childhood.
Wow.
Right? So that's a scary reality.
It is
but
a
it's
scary
the truth.
reality. Yeah. Well,
But
no,
it's the truth.
we most of us, or many of us, know someone who just jumps from one toxic relationship to the next.
And they have a trauma history, I guarantee
and
it.
you ask, well, why do you subject yourself? You were married to an abusive alcoholic. Now the next person you married is an abusive alcoholic, and the next one you married is an abusive cocaine addict. And the next one-
It doesn't matter, but it's just like that whole thing.
But we put a lot of shame on those people. Oh, you're stupid. Why do you keep, putting yourself in the same situation? And we tend to it's like victim blaming.
Well, that's exactly the case. And the thing that's sad about that is they blame themselves more than we could ever blame them.
Yeah.
And it only reinforces when we go, God, what are you doing? What are you, stupid? This is, better than this. When we do that, we only make it worse.
We make it worse, yeah.
Yeah.
And that feeling, that gut feeling, right? Butterflies in the stomach. I've been around people who have had at a very moment something happened to them that triggered them, and the first thing they do is throw up. They just get so bound up.
Sure.
But it happens
that fast.
It's walking down the street, talking to someone, having a conversation, and then something happens. Maybe a loud noise. I know someone who when they hear the sound of a helicopter, this is going back to Vietnam, when they just the sound of a helicopter, it's instant, and then there's physical anguish,
Sure.
along with with emotional duress, and it just seems to happen from one second to the next.
It doesn't take long. It doesn't take long. So the thing that's interesting too is we as trauma survivors have a tendency to do a couple of things. One is we get triggered by stuff, and it doesn't have to be like something exactly the same. Right? It's like, so, you were with an abuser, and then you got another abuser. No, it could be as simple as somebody saying a word or a phrase in a certain tone of voice that can instantly trigger you.
Yeah.
It can trigger you to irrationality. It can also trigger you to something completely different, which is very interesting, which is dissociation, which is I'm gone. I'm not present. That was one of the things that happened in my yoga training classes when I was early on, which is, the instructor would be up there, she'd be talking, and I couldn't tell you today what it was that she said.
Just blank.
All of a sudden, an hour later, I'm back in my body going, what the heck?
What?
Where did I go?
Yeah.
If you've ever had the experience, it's shaming to yourself, thinking, I wanted to hear this, and I don't have any idea what she said.
Yeah.
I missed it. I mean, I'm paying for this class.
Sure.
I want to learn this stuff.
Yeah. And then you don't want to go back and say,
I don't want to
what did
say,
you
you know what?
say?
I didn't hear anything you said. Can you can you repeat that? I want to record you. Can I record this? Right? Because that was something that happened to me. It happens frequently to trauma survivors, is that they dissociate. They just go away. That's something that I can teach people how to recognize as it starts, so that they can bring themselves back. Breath is a key to that. It's not the only key to that, but that's part of it. Dysregulation is the other thing, which is that, all of a sudden going bug-ass crazy, right? It's like, over something that was like somebody said one thing and you're just like nuts.
Yeah.
Because it's a trigger. Because it's something that hit you from somewhere before. And until you start to acknowledge the history, until you start to learn about what's actually happening inside you, mostly we're unconscious of it.
So you can literally be a person who unknowingly, or actually let's not even try to pretend to be someone. Just say if you're yourself and you're dealing with a trauma survivor, it's possible, I guess, that they could completely misunderstand or misinterpret everything, whether it be a body language, something you said, an action you took, or something that might not even be related to them.
A facial expression.
Is that attached to, say, people who are dealing with a lack of self-confidence or self-loathing, or self, people that really hate themselves?
I'm not going to say that every trauma survivor hates themselves, but they've definitely got an inaccurate picture of who they are, and frequently an inaccurate picture of who other people are. And I'm a good example of that from my past. So it's a reality, right? That our perception has been skewed by what it is that we have lived through. It is not accurate. And until we can come to terms with those things that trigger us, with those awarenesses, and bring a modicum of healing and peace into our own psyche, we are at the mercy of our trauma.
So I'm guessing
that is not a good place.
I'm guessing there's people out there, many people out there that have suffered trauma, that are aware of all this, but they don't have the tools you can't fix another person. They've got to do that themselves. That I learned just being a husband, right? But if there's people out there who are aware they have trauma, they're aware of how damaging that trauma is to their present, but they don't have the tools. Or really even the knowledge on how to apply that to themselves. Is that something that you could help people with?
Yes, absolutely I can. Yeah. Absolutely I can. And that is kind of the point, right? Is being able to look at those things, and you don't know at the time that it happens, that there's something that maybe trauma, this maybe came from trauma, but you may have a sense of, of anger and blaming toward someone else. And maybe it's justified. Maybe there's legitimacy.
Sure.
But if you think about it later and you're sitting there going, well, maybe I was a little bit, no, he deserved that. Because we justify our own, what I want to say, our own behavior, because we are so traumatized by life in general that we don't even recognize how our behavior is dysfunctional as well. And so, when you find yourself justifying your own bad behavior, that's a clue. But until you have that awareness of it and you can talk to somebody about it and say, okay, so this, and this, and this, and they can listen to you, and without saying, no, you're wrong, but go, that's very interesting. What about this? And did you think about what happened here? And what happened for you there? Where did you feel that in your body? What was going on for you when?
Sure.
You start to get, and yes, that sounds like therapy, I know. Right. So that's important.
Sure.
So I call myself a yoga therapist and trauma coach, because that is what I work with.
Yeah. And is it common to where if someone dealing with trauma, their behavior becomes like, if you're married to a drug abuser or an alcoholic, that your way of dealing with it is you yourself becoming a drug abuser and an alcoholic. Or if you're dealing with someone, maybe you've gotten physically beaten as a child and now you carry that on and are physically abusive to your children. Is that something that happens?
Certainly the latter is true. If you have been abused as a child, that gets carried on a lot of times by the parents. And they justify it. Well, I lived through that. That was what my parents, spoil the rod, spare the rod, spoil the child, right? That kind of thing. That's for sure. I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen that people that are living with an abusive alcoholic become abusive alcoholics, because trauma happens in families. So is it true that that person who's living with the abusive alcoholic is being traumatized? Yes, and probably was traumatized in childhood? Yes. Is it also true that the alcoholic, the abuser in this relationship, was probably traumatized as a child? Yes. Has been traumatized in relationships? Yes.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave.
It's not just, that's the thing, is it's not just one person who's blameless and perfect and the martyr. We all have, those of us that engage in these kinds of relationships all have trauma. And the alcoholic, every bit as much so, sometimes more so, as the others in the family. Because, if you think about it, what better way to deal with unresolved trauma than to drink and drug at it and check out. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Right. So it's like, I'm checking out because I can't handle it. It's too much. It's too painful. Screw this. Yeah. Right. No, and so they do. And when they say, screw this, I'm checking out, chances are they get, that what happens with alcohol and what happens with drugs is you lose your ability to think rationally, and so behavior starts to go sideways. Right. And so there you go. Well,
I'll tell you this, I have shows where an hour isn't nearly enough. And this is one of them. We're just about out of time, and I really wish we had a whole nother hour. I have so many questions. And I know that you have, yes, I was going to say you need to come back.
I will.
We got about a minute. Is there, and I'm going to put all this in my post-production video, phone number you want to give out or any information you want to give out now, like a website or something?
Absolutely. So you can find me at http:// treatingtraumawithyoga.com, just exactly like what it sounds like. You can call me on WhatsApp, Celeste Mendelsohn, MENDELSOHN, and it is my U.S. number 818-400-3838, and my Panamanian number, which I still haven't memorized, but I will, is 6472-3445.
Great. And all that information will be out there Sunday or Monday once I get the video done. We are out of time. Celeste Mendelson. Yes, one more thing?
One more thing.
Yes.
You can email me at celeste@treatingtraumawithyoga.com.
Great.
That's all.
I want to thank you so much. This has been a fascinating show. You're a fascinating human being.
Thank you.
And I thank you for joining us. You've been listening to Boquete Now Talk Radio on Radio Cherokee 103.3 FM, sponsored by Big Daddy's Grill and the ACCB. We'll see you next week with 9/11 first responder Ron Parker.